Naivasha, 60 miles north of Nairobi and 5,000 feet above sea level, is the highest lake in the Kenya Rift. Unlike the nearby Rift lakes, its waters are fresh. Vast floating islands of papyrus thrive on it. Underground streams are thought to run out of Naivasha, draining it and preventing the excessive evaporation that deposits salt and soda in the other lakes. Longonot, the volcano to the south, created Naivasha by damming the valley with its lava. It's surprising that the lake waters remain so fresh when rainy season storms wash in minerals from the volcanic soil all around. There are two quite separate floating worlds at Naivasha. The first is the world of the purple-flowered lily pads. Then there's the world of the papyrus islands. Often those islands drift together to become almost a continent of papyrus. But the breeze constantly alters the continent's outline, tearing away fragments to voyage on their own above the surface of the lake. Papyrus, the bulrush of the Bible, in which the infant Moses was supposed to have been found, is really a giant perennial sedge. The leaves and flowers occur at the top of the 10-foot stems. It's usually found in shallow water. When the small islands come together, it forms an impenetrable floating platform that looks as solid as dry land. Naivasha is full of fish, both the native tilapia and the American black bass, recently and perhaps unwisely introduced for sport, and it's thriving mightily. Along the shoreline, where the floating worlds of lily and papyrus meet, it's a great place for fish and for fishermen. The Goliath, the largest of the herons, knows he's invisible to his prey against the background of papyrus stems. Like all good fishermen, he realizes the importance of stealthy movement. A glossy ibis threatens to break the intensity of his concentration. But in the event, nothing disturbs the Goliath, the complete angler. Another annoyance, a moorhen, a nuisance to anglers the world over because they're inclined to disturb the fish. The Goliath decides he might as well move his pitch. And that seems to pay off. The catch is a tilapia. Jealousy amongst anglers is not unknown, but the fish eagle arrives too late. The Goliath's already swallowed his catch. The ibis is usually after crustacea and mollusks at the water's edge. but I think he sometimes takes fish and frogs too. After his fish, the Goliath heron needs a drink and a wash. A spear fisherman, the darter, he skewers fish with his beak. The cormorant is snorkeling, prospecting with head below the surface. You find all styles of angling and anglers at Naivasha. Ducks cruise the lily channels. A yellowbill, a Hottentot teal. Perhaps the most dedicated fishermen of all are the small herons like the squacco. All that effort for such a small tiddler, probably a tilapia fry. First prize for sheer concentration must surely go to the night heron. One wonders what food they're after in a case like that. It could have been something very small, like an aquatic insect, perhaps a mosquito larva. Night herons are usually crepuscular, creatures of the twilight. It's fairly unusual to find one looking for food in the full glare of the midday sun. The kingfishers are the brightest jewels of Naivasha, and the smallest, the tiny malachite kingfisher, is a gem in any setting. The bird itself is easy to find. Its nest is a different matter. From the rate at which this malachite was catching frogs, it obviously had young to feed. To film those young, Cindy had carefully to cut away the bank behind the nest and insert a glass panel. And there are the week-old chicks being fed. You can see the red bill and foot of the adult at the top on the left. They're secure in their 18-inch deep nest, hollowed out by the parents themselves. Most of the youngsters' diet seem to be the tiny tree frogs that swarm among the Papyrus Islands. They made quite sure the frogs were dead before offering them to the young. Sometimes they flew away to some other anvil to complete the job. There's always a risk to nesting birds in this kind of filming. It's the duty of a nature photographer to leave a nest well alone if the parents seem to be at all uneasy. So when she'd got this shot of the parent offering food to its chicks, Cindy filled in the earth again and left the kingfishers to their own domestic routine. The filming hadn't troubled the malachites, and this was proved a week or so later when two fully grown young appeared outside the nest hole. Their plumage still looked a bit ruffled, but they'll very soon become as immaculate as their brilliant malachite blue parents. The herons, the kingfishers, the ibis, they're all essentially birds of Naivasha's papyrus. But there's that other floating world, on the ground floor, so to speak, below the papyrus beds, the lily pads. sorts of bird inhabitants frequent the lily pads. Swimmers, like Naivasha's abundant coots, which aren't so different from the more familiar European kind. And then there are the pedestrians, the African pied wagtail, whose lightweight footsteps don't even rock the lily pads. The wagtail is looking for insects. So is the wood sandpiper, though its weight calls for a little more support. The reeve, a slightly heavier wading bird, don't linger too long supported by only one lily leaf. But the bird that has it all worked out is the jacana, or lily trotter. It has evolved feet with excessively long toes to spread its weight on the quaking lily pads, hence its name, lily trotter. Although bigger than a wood sandpiper, it's dwarfed by the snoozing pink-backed pelican. The two lifestyles of the lily dwellers meet as wood sandpiper hurries dryshod past swimming coot. It's noticeable that when the coots want to haul out, they have to find a more substantial perch than a lily pad. The lily-bed lagoons attract those heavyweight fishermen, the great white pelicans. 2 or 3 pounds of fish a day are needed to keep this great bird going. And in Naivasha, there's no problem about catching that amount of food. The dabchick surface dives for its food. But one of Naivasha's, and indeed Africa's, most prominent fishermen has what appears to be a most exhausting method of hunting. The pied kingfisher repeatedly hovers to spot its prey. That time it was successful. But pied kingfishers always seem to make at least 5 dives before they catch a fish. This one's an unusually large fish and has to be held very firmly while the bird makes up its mind how to deal with it. In the end, it beats the prey on a branch, just like our own European kingfisher. Finally, the hungry bird manages it, though he's trespassed onto a neighbor's fishing perch to swallow his fish. Well, Naivasha in its present state has room for everyone, though that may not always be the case. The cry of the fish eagle. It echoes all day long around Naivasha's shores. The lake is famous for the numbers of eagles that nest there. Naivasha not only has an abundance of fish, but an abundance of suitable nesting trees. This pair have reared 2 young to nearly full grown. The young eagles will shortly be leaving the nest. The parent birds sit some distance away in another acacia tree. Their duties are now confined to catching fish for their hungry offspring. This dive, filmed in slow motion, was unsuccessful. The next attempt catches a small one. Both parents fish together, but only the lower one makes the catch. fish eagles constantly call in flight. Male and female have different voices. The male's, strangely enough, is the treble. The female's is a rich contralto. They're highly territorial, each pair staking a claim to a nesting and fishing tree and to an oblong piece of water stretching out from the shore. The female is a tenth larger than her mate, and in the early stages does most of the feeding of the young. She often catches fish to feed the male as well. One young bird is usually all that survives from a clutch of 2 or 3 eggs, but this time there are 2. The female returns with yet another fish, which the youngsters will be expected to tear up themselves. Now they'll leave the nest and be driven away to seek their own fishing grounds. But for the moment, one of them is tolerated on a fishing perch beside his parents. Few places offer a greater variety of water birds than Naivasha. A yellow-billed egret takes off from the swamp. There was one bird in particular which Cindy Buxton was determined to film at the nest. Despite its name, this was not a water bird at all, the woodland kingfisher. And it's usually found in, well, woodlands. The problem was where to find a nest at Naivasha. Well, obviously you start by searching among the trees. She's brought her African helper, though he's not a bird expert.
I'll show you which one we're looking for now. You see, it's not going to be the...
But a bird book is a good start. That's the malachite kingfisher. She's already filmed them at the nest. Lower down the page, there's the woodland. As for the hovering pied kingfisher, a mime describes that one. Now her helper's got a good idea of what they're searching for. But of course the actual bird doesn't show up quite as obligingly as that. Woodland kingfishers are a race apart from those that get their living mainly by catching fish. They're larger birds and they belong to a branch of the family called halcyon kingfishers. This includes about 40 different species. It's not at all necessary for them to live by water. Woodland or even thick forest suits them just as well. This small wood at Naivasha is right on the lake side. Cindy's helper, a keen but untrained observer, has often seen kingfishers flying about here, but that's a different thing from spotting a nest. From the tree, it should be possible to pinpoint the bird's comings and goings. At last, a woodland kingfisher shows up. It enters a hole in a dead tree, standing a few yards out in the lake. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's nesting there. It may simply be just looking for a site, or even searching for grubs. But when it shows up with a freshly caught tree frog, things look really hopeful. It must have young to feed. It delivers the frog at the entrance of the nest hole, so the nest is occupied. The watcher in the tree reports success. Although it's a fairly common bird, not very much is known about the nesting habits of the woodland kingfisher. Some people believe it can hollow out holes in banks, like the malachite, for example. But these particular kingfishers have followed the more usual pattern and chosen a dead tree. Cindy surveys the problem for herself. That tree out in the lake is not going to be an easy place to film. Another tree frog. The young must be fairly advanced to need such large and frequent helpings. The youngsters are clamoring for food at the nest entrance. The white spot on the tip of the beak is a signal that prompts the parent to feed them with such tasty morsels as the red dragonflies that abound among the papyrus beds. The woodland kingfisher doesn't hack out its own nest hole in a dead tree. It relies on others, like the woodpecker, to do the job, and then takes over a woodpecker or a barbet's old nest. From now on, the young will get a non-stop supply of frogs and insects. A pretty large dragonfly this time. It's so large that the parent has difficulty pushing it through the nesting hole. The profile of the exquisite woodland kingfisher completes one photographer's brief impressionistic portrait of an African lake. But there is a reality to the portrait as well. Naivasha is easily reached from Nairobi. The scene is set fair now, but clouds could gather over Naivasha in the near future. Pressures from water skiers and powerboats could disturb this paradise. Perhaps the lake is large enough for most interests to be accommodated, including wildlife. But it'll take planning, and planning really needs to be done long before the dark clouds gather.
On Tuesday at 4, Survival looks at the plight of the dwindling population of crocodiles around the world.